Maya Rodriguez looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror and tried to smooth down her hair. Her black uniform was clean but worn. The white apron tied around her waist had a small stain that would not come out no matter how hard she scrubbed. She took a deep breath and picked up her name tag. The plastic clip was broken, so she had to pin it to her shirt with a safety pin. Tonight was different from her usual job at the local diner. Tonight she was working at the Steinway Gallery. This was the fanciest place she had ever been inside. Rich people came here to buy pianos that cost more than most people made in a year. Tonight was their big charity event, and Maya needed the extra money. She walked out of the staff bathroom and into the main hall. Her eyes went wide. The room was huge with tall ceilings and crystal lights hanging down like frozen waterfalls. The walls were painted cream white, and expensive paintings hung in gold frames. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers. But what made Maya stop and stare was the piano in the center of the room. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The piano was black and shiny like a mirror. It reflected the lights above and seemed to glow. The lid was open, showing the strings inside. Even from across the room, Maya could see how perfect it looked. "Rodriguez, stop staring and get to work!" The sharp voice made Maya jump. Mrs. Patterson, the catering manager, was glaring at her. The older woman had gray hair pulled back tight and wore all black. She always looked angry about something. "Sorry, ma'am," Maya said quickly. She hurried over to the serving station where other workers were getting ready. There were about 10 people working tonight. Most of them were older and had done this kind of work for years. Maya was the youngest at 17. "You take the champagne," Mrs. Patterson said, pointing to a tray of tall glasses filled with bubbly golden liquid. "Walk around the room, smile, don't talk unless someone talks to you first. And whatever you do, don't touch anything except the drinks." Maya picked up the heavy tray. The glasses clinked softly as she walked. She had practiced carrying trays at the diner, but these glasses were much fancier. Each one probably cost more than she made in a day. The guests started arriving at 6 o'clock. Maya watched from the corner as they came through the front door. The women wore long dresses that sparkled with jewels. Their hair was done perfectly, and their makeup looked like it was painted by an artist. The men wore black suits with bow ties. Everyone looked like they belonged in a movie. Maya began walking around the room with her tray. "Champagne?" she asked softly when people looked her way. Most guests took a glass without really looking at her. It was like she was invisible. She was just part of the background, like the paintings on the walls. As she moved through the crowd, Maya listened to the conversations around her. The guests talked about their vacations to places she had only seen in pictures. They mentioned their children's private schools and expensive cars. One woman complained that her piano teacher was charging too much for lessons. Maya almost laughed. The woman was probably paying more for one lesson than Maya's family spent on groceries in a month. Maya's family owned a small music store on the other side of town. It was not in a good neighborhood. The store was old and needed repairs they could not afford. Her father, Carlos, fixed instruments that people brought in. Her mother, Elena, gave music lessons to local kids for very little money. They barely made enough to pay rent each month. Maya had been working since she was 14 to help her family. She cleaned tables at Rosa's diner after school and on weekends. Every dollar she made went to help pay bills. She did not mind the work, but sometimes she dreamed of a different life. The piano in the center of the room seemed to call to her as she worked. Every time she walked past it, she slowed down a little. She had been playing piano since she was 5 years old. Her parents had an old upright piano in their store. It was missing some keys and needed tuning, but Maya loved it anyway. She had learned to play by watching videos on the internet and reading old music books from the library. Her parents were too busy working to give her proper lessons. They wanted to, but piano teachers cost money they did not have. Maya was good at playing. Really good. She could hear a song once and play it back almost perfectly. She wrote her own music too. When she played, she forgot about everything else. The old piano in her father's shop became a gateway to another world. But here, surrounded by all this wealth, Maya felt small. These people probably had piano lessons from the time they could walk. They had beautiful instruments and expensive teachers. Maya had calloused fingers from working and an old piano that barely stayed in tune. A man in an expensive suit walked past her. He was talking on his phone about buying a piano for his daughter. "She's only 6, but her teacher says she has talent," he said. "I want to get her the best instrument we can find." Maya felt a sharp pain in her chest. She wondered what it would be like to have parents who could buy the best of everything. What would it be like to never worry about money? To have a beautiful piano like the one in front of her? She shook her head and kept working. This was not her world. She was just here to serve drinks and make money for her family. In a few hours, she would go home to her small apartment above the music store. She would help her mother clean up and count the day's small earnings. Then she would sit at the old piano and play until it was time for bed. But tonight, for just a few hours, she could pretend she belonged in this beautiful place. She could walk among these people and admire the gorgeous piano. She could dream about what it would sound like to play something so perfect. Maya did not know that in just a few hours this piano would change her life forever. She did not know that her calloused fingers would soon touch those perfect keys. And she certainly did not know that a room full of wealthy strangers would soon hear the music that lived in her heart. For now, she was just a girl with a tray of champagne, trying to make it through another night of work. But sometimes the most extraordinary things begin in the most ordinary moments. 2 hours into the event, Maya's feet were starting to hurt. She had been walking around the room with heavy trays since 6 o'clock. Her black shoes were old and the soles were thin. Every step on the hard marble floor sent a small shock up her legs. She had served champagne, small sandwiches, and tiny cakes that looked too pretty to eat. The guests barely looked at her as they took food from her tray. She was like a shadow moving through their bright world. Mrs. Patterson appeared beside her with another full tray. "Take these around," she said, loading Maya's arms with small plates of fancy cheese and crackers. "And remember, don't linger. Keep moving." Maya nodded and started walking again. As she moved through the crowd, she could not help but look at the piano. It sat in the middle of the room like a sleeping giant. The lights above made it shine like black water. She had never seen anything so beautiful. She knew it was a Steinway concert grand piano. She had read about them in music magazines at the library. These pianos were made by hand by master craftsmen. Each one took almost a year to build. The sound was supposed to be perfect, like nothing else in the world. A small group of people stood near the piano, talking and laughing. Maya walked closer, offering them food from her tray. She tried to listen to their conversation without being obvious. "My daughter just started at the conservatory," one woman was saying. She wore a blue dress that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. "She's been playing since she was 3. We have a Steinway at home, of course." "Of course," another woman agreed. "These cheap pianos just won't do for serious students. You need the best instrument if you want real results." Maya felt her cheeks get hot. Their piano at home was definitely not expensive. It was probably older than she was. The keys stuck sometimes, and it had not been tuned in over a year. But Maya loved it anyway. It was the piano where she had learned to make music. "Would anyone like some cheese?" Maya asked quietly, holding up her tray. The women barely glanced at her as they each took a small plate. They kept talking as if she was not there. "I heard they're going to have someone play tonight," the first woman said. "Some famous pianist from New York." Maya's heart jumped. Someone was going to play the beautiful piano? She hoped she would be able to hear it. She had never heard a real concert grand piano being played by a professional musician. She moved away from the group and continued serving food. But now she kept looking around, trying to see if she could spot the famous pianist. How would she know who it was? Would it be someone she had heard of? As the evening went on, more people arrived. The room became crowded and noisy. Maya had to push through groups of people to get around with her tray. The conversations got louder as people drank more champagne. Around 8 o'clock, Mrs. Patterson called all the servers together. "It's time for your break," she said. 15 minutes. Don't wander around. Stay in the back room." Maya followed the other workers to a small room behind the kitchen. It had a few chairs and a table with sandwiches and coffee for the staff. Most of the workers sat down and rubbed their feet. Maya ate half a sandwich and drank some water, but she could not stop thinking about the piano. In all her years of playing, she had never touched anything so fine. She wondered what the keys would feel like under her fingers. Would they be smooth? Would they respond to the lightest touch? "You look like you're dreaming about something," said Carlos, one of the older waiters. He was a kind man who always smiled at Maya when they worked together. "I was just thinking about the piano," Maya admitted. "I play a little bit. You play piano?" Carlos looked interested. "That's wonderful. My wife used to play when she was young. She always said music was the language of the heart." Maya smiled. She liked that idea. Music was definitely the language of her heart. When she played, she could say things that she could never put into words. "Maybe someday you'll have a piano like that one," Carlos said, nodding toward the main room. Maya laughed, but not in a mean way. "That piano costs more than my family will make in 10 years, she said. "But I can dream." "Dreams are important," Carlos said seriously. "Sometimes they come true in ways we don't expect." Mrs. Patterson stuck her head into the room. "Break's over. Back to work." Maya stood up and straightened her apron. As she walked back to the main room, she felt something different in the air. The crowd seemed more excited. People were moving toward one side of the room. She picked up a fresh tray of champagne and started walking around again. But she noticed that many of the guests were not paying attention to her anymore. They were all looking toward a small stage that had been set up near the piano. A man in a dark suit walked onto the stage. He had gray hair and looked very serious. Maya recognized him from the pictures in the program. He was Mr. Steinway himself, the owner of the gallery. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into a microphone, "thank you all for coming tonight to support music education in our community." The room got quiet. Maya stopped walking and listened. "Tonight we had planned to have a special performance by the renowned pianist Maria Volkov," Mr. Steinway continued. "Unfortunately, Ms. Volkov has become ill and cannot be with us tonight." A disappointed murmur went through the crowd. Maya felt disappointed too. She had been looking forward to hearing someone play the beautiful piano. "However," Mr. Steinway said, raising his hand for quiet, "the evening is still young, and this magnificent instrument deserves to be heard." He gestured toward the piano. "Perhaps we have some talented guests tonight who would like to share their gift with us." Maya's heart started beating faster. Was he asking if anyone in the audience wanted to play? She looked around the room. Some people were whispering to each other, but no one stepped forward. The piano sat there waiting. Maya could almost feel it calling to her. She had dreamed of playing an instrument like this her whole life. But she was just a server. She was not a guest. She did not belong. Mr. Steinway waited for a moment, then shrugged. "Well, perhaps later in the evening," he said. "For now, please continue to enjoy the party." The crowd began talking again and the moment passed. Maya started walking with her tray, but she felt different inside. Something was stirring in her chest. It felt like excitement mixed with longing. The piano was right there. It was beautiful and perfect and just waiting for someone to bring it to life. Maya knew she could play it. She knew she could make beautiful music on those keys, but she also knew her place. She was the help. She was invisible. People like her did not play pianos that cost more than houses. She walked past the piano again, and this time she slowed down even more. Her eyes traced the curved lines of its body. She could see her reflection in the shiny black surface. What would it hurt to just touch it? Just one key? Just to know how it felt? Maya shook her head and kept walking. She had work to do. She had a job to finish. Dreams were nice, but they did not pay bills or help families. But as she moved through the room serving drinks and food, part of her mind stayed with the piano. It was like a magnet pulling at her heart. Every time she looked at it, she felt something deep inside her stirring to life. She did not know it yet, but that stirring feeling was about to change everything. By 9:30, the crowd had thinned out a bit. Some guests had left early, and others had moved to different parts of the gallery to look at the pianos for sale. Maya found herself with fewer people to serve, which gave her more time to think. And all she could think about was the piano. She had walked past it dozens of times tonight. Each time she felt a stronger pull toward it. The instrument seemed to be waiting for her, calling to her in a language only she could understand. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her elbow again. "Maya, go take these empty trays back to the kitchen," she said, handing her a stack of silver trays. "Then you can have another break. Things are slowing down." Maya carried the trays to the kitchen in the back of the building. The kitchen was busy with people washing dishes and packing up leftover food. She set down the trays and walked toward the break room. But instead of going into the break room, she found herself walking back toward the main hall. She told herself she was just going to check if any guests needed anything. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wanted to be near the piano. The main hall was much quieter now. Most of the remaining guests were on the other side of the room, looking at smaller pianos and talking with the salespeople. The big concert grand sat alone in the center like an island of beauty in the middle of the marble floor. Maya looked around. No one was watching her. Mrs. Patterson was in the kitchen. The other servers were on break. The guests were busy with their own conversations. She walked slowly toward the piano. With each step, her heart beat faster. She felt like she was doing something forbidden, something dangerous. But she could not stop herself. She reached the piano and stood beside it. Up close, it was even more beautiful. The black surface was so shiny she could see her face in it. The keys were perfect white and black rectangles lined up like soldiers ready for battle. Maya looked around one more time. Still no one was watching. The nearest group of people was at least 30 feet away, and they were not looking in her direction. She reached out her hand toward the keys. Her fingers were shaking. These hands had washed dishes and carried trays and cleaned tables. They were not the soft white hands of a rich person. They were rough from work, with small cuts and calluses. But they were also the hands that had made music every day for 12 years. They knew how to find the right notes, how to press the keys with just the right touch. They knew how to bring a piano to life. Maya touched one key very gently. It was a middle C. The note that rang out was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. It was pure and clear and seemed to fill the whole room. She looked around quickly, afraid someone had heard. But the guests were still busy with their own conversations. The sound of that one note did something to Maya. It was like a door opening in her heart. All the music she had inside her, all the songs she had written and played on her old piano at home, suddenly came rushing forward. Before she could stop herself, she pressed another key. Then another. Soon she was playing a simple melody with her right hand. It was a song she had written last month when her father had been sick and she was worried about him. The piano responded to her touch like magic. Every note was perfect. The keys felt smooth and alive under her fingers. It was nothing like the old worn piano at home. This instrument wanted to be played. It was hungry for music. Maya forgot where she was. She forgot about her uniform and her job, and the fact that she did not belong in this fancy place. All she knew was the music flowing from her fingers to the keys to the air around her. She began to play with both hands now. The melody grew more complex, more beautiful. It was a story told in music, a story about dreams and struggles and hope. It was the story of a girl who loved music more than anything else in the world. The piano sang under her hands. Every note was exactly what she intended. She could play softly and the piano whispered. She could play with force and the piano roared. It was like having a conversation with an old friend. Maya had written this piece during the long nights when her father was in the hospital. She had been so scared that he might not come home. The music started sad and worried, full of dark, low notes that sounded like tears. But then it began to change. Hope crept in through higher notes like sunlight breaking through clouds. The melody grew stronger and more confident. It spoke of love and family and the strength to keep going even when things looked dark. As Maya played, she felt something she had never experienced before. This was not just playing music. This was becoming music. She and the piano were one instrument, creating something beautiful together. The notes flowed around her like water, lifting her up and carrying her away from the marble floor and crystal chandeliers. She was in a place where only music existed, where every emotion could be expressed through sound. She played the gentle parts with fingers as light as feathers. She played the strong parts with hands that seemed to have a power of their own. The piano responded to every change, every feeling, every thought. Maya had never played her composition all the way through before. At home, she was always interrupted by customers in the store or by her mother calling her for dinner or chores. But here, in this moment, she could play it from beginning to end. The piece was telling the story of her father getting better, of the family coming back together, of gratitude for the good things in life. The music swirled upward, full of joy and relief and love. Maya felt tears on her cheeks, but she did not stop playing. The music was bigger than she was now. It had taken on a life of its own. Her hands moved across the keys like they were dancing. The composition was reaching its end. The melody was becoming softer, more peaceful. It was like the end of a long journey, when the traveler finally comes home. The notes were saying thank you. Thank you for music, thank you for love, thank you for life. Maya played the final chord and let it ring out into the silence. For a moment, the world was perfectly still. The last note seemed to hang in the air like a bird that did not want to land. She sat there with her hands still on the keys, breathing hard. She felt like she had run a long race, Her heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was pounding from the pure joy of making music on this incredible instrument. Slowly, she became aware of where she was again. The marble floor, the crystal lights, the fancy paintings on the walls. She was Maya Rodriguez, the girl with the worn uniform and the broken name tag. She was the server who was supposed to be invisible, and she had just played the most beautiful music of her life on a piano she had no right to touch. Maya lifted her hands from the keys and looked around, expecting to see an empty room. But what she saw made her blood turn to ice. She was not alone anymore. Maya's heart stopped. Standing in a half circle around the piano were at least 20 people. Some were guests she had served drinks to earlier. Others were people she did not recognize. All of them were staring at her. At the front of the group stood Mrs. Pemberton, the woman who had organized the charity event. She was tall and thin with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her face was red with anger, and her eyes were cold as ice. "Excuse me," Mrs. Pemberton said in a voice that could cut glass. "What do you think you are doing?" Maya felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. She could not breathe. She could not speak. She could only sit there on the piano bench, frozen with fear and shame. "I asked you a question," Mrs. Pemberton said, taking a step closer. "What are you doing touching this piano?" Maya finally found her voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. I was just what?" Mrs. Pemberton's voice got louder. "Just playing with a $200,000 instrument like it was a toy?" The number hit Maya like a punch to the stomach. $200,000. That was more money than her family would see in their entire lives. That was enough money to buy 10 houses in her neighborhood, and she had just put her rough working hands all over it. Some of the guests began to whisper among themselves. Maya could hear bits of their conversations, and each word made her feel smaller and more ashamed. "Who is she?" "One of the servers, I think." "How did she even know how to play?" "Probably learned from YouTube or something." "This is completely inappropriate." Mrs. Pemberton held up her hand for silence. "This piano is not a toy for the help to play with," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is a serious instrument for serious musicians." She turned to look at Maya with disgust. "Look at your hands," she said. "Those are working hands. Rough hands. You probably have never had a proper lesson in your life." Maya looked down at her hands. They were still resting on the keys. Mrs. Pemberton was right. Her hands were rough. There were small cuts from washing dishes at the diner. Her fingernails were short and practical, not long and polished like the hands of the rich women in the room. But these hands had just made beautiful music. These hands had brought the piano to life. Did it matter what they looked like? "Get away from that piano right now," Mrs. Pemberton ordered. "You have no business touching something so valuable." Maya started to stand up, but her legs felt weak. She was shaking all over. She had never been so embarrassed in her life. Someone in the crowd laughed. It was a mean, sharp sound. "I suppose she thinks she's the next Carnegie Hall star," a man's voice said. Other people began to chuckle. "Did you see how she was crying while she played?" a woman added. "So dramatic, like she was performing at the Metropolitan Opera." The laughter got louder. Maya felt her face burning with shame. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to run away and never come back. "Honestly," another woman said, "where do these people get such ideas? You can't just touch a piano like this without permission. It's probably never been properly tuned." "I heard her playing," said a man with a thick mustache. "It wasn't that good. Sounded like someone who learned from a book." Maya finally managed to stand up. She took a step away from the piano, but Mrs. Pemberton was not finished with her yet. "Do you have any idea how much damage you could have done?" she demanded. "Your hands could have left marks on those keys. Oil from your skin could have damaged the finish." Maya wanted to say that she had been very careful. She wanted to explain that she loved music, that she would never hurt a piano, but no words would come out of her mouth. "And the germs," added a woman in a pink dress. "She's been handling food and drinks all night. Now she's touched the piano with those same hands." "Disgusting," agreed another woman. "The whole instrument will have to be cleaned and sanitized." Maya felt sick to her stomach. She had thought she was making something beautiful. But these people saw only dirt and damage. They saw only a servant girl who had overstepped her bounds. Mrs. Patterson, the catering manager, pushed through the crowd. Her face was dark with anger. "Rodriguez," she shouted. "What do you think you're doing?" "I'm sorry," Maya whispered. "I didn't mean any harm." "I was just what?" Mrs. Patterson snapped. Just thought you could take a break from your job to play concert pianist? The crowd was getting larger. More people were coming over to see what the commotion was about. Maya felt like an animal in a zoo, with everyone staring at her and judging her. She probably thought no one would notice. Someone said with a laugh, like she could just sneak over and play a little music. The nerve of some people, another voice added. Give them a job and they think they own the place. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she tried not to let them fall. She would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her cry again. Mrs. Pemberton was still not done. She turned to address the crowd like she was giving a speech. This is exactly why we have rules about who can touch these instruments, she announced. Pianos like this are meant for trained professionals. They require years of proper education and technique. She looked back at Maya with scorn. Not some girl who probably learned to play on a broken-down piano in some music store. The words hit Maya like arrows. Mrs. Pemberton was exactly right. Maya had learned on a broken-down piano in a music store. But that did not make her music less real or less beautiful. Look at her uniform, Mrs. Pemberton continued. Look at her shoes. This is obviously someone who has never been around fine things before. Maya looked down at her clothes. Her black uniform was clean but old. Her shoes were worn and scuffed. Her apron was stained. Everything about her screamed that she did not belong in this fancy place. But inside she was still the same person who had just created something beautiful. The music was still singing in her heart, even as these people tried to tear her down with their cruel words. I think we should call security, suggested a man in an expensive suit. She could have damaged the piano. The gallery could sue her family for the repairs. Maya's heart jumped with fear. Sue her family? They barely had enough money to pay rent. If something was wrong with the piano, if she had somehow hurt it, they could lose everything. Please, she said, finding her voice at last. I didn't hurt anything. I was very careful. I love pianos. I would never love pianos? Mrs. Pemberton laughed coldly. You love pianos, but you don't know the first thing about respecting them. The crowd murmured agreement. Maya felt completely alone, surrounded by hostile faces and cutting words. But then something unexpected happened. A voice from the back of the crowd spoke up. It was calm and quiet, but it carried a strange authority that made everyone stop talking. Please, the voice said. Let her continue. The voice came from the back of the crowd, but everyone heard it clearly. It was not loud, but something about it made people stop talking and turn around. Maya looked toward the voice and saw an elderly man walking slowly through the group of people. He was Asian, probably in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire rim glasses. He wore a perfectly fitted black tuxedo and moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to being listened to. The crowd parted to let him pass. Maya noticed that people seemed to recognize him. There were whispers of excitement and surprise. It can't be, what is he doing here? I thought he was in Europe. The man walked all the way to the front of the group and stood near the piano. He looked at Maya with gentle eyes that seemed to see right into her heart. My name is Jonathan Chen, he said quietly. I was standing in the back of the room and I heard your performance. Maya felt her knees go weak. Jonathan Chen, she knew that name. Every piano student in the world knew that name. He was one of the greatest pianists alive. He had played in concert halls around the world. He taught at the most famous music school in America, and he had heard her play. Mrs. Pemberton looked confused and angry. Mr. Chen, she said, I'm sorry you had to witness this. This girl is just a server. She had no right to touch the piano. Mr. Chen held up his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice was still quiet, but everyone in the room listened carefully. I have been listening from the doorway for the past 10 minutes, he said. What I heard was not the playing of someone who has never had a proper lesson. What I heard was extraordinary. Maya could not believe what she was hearing. Jonathan Chen thought her playing was extraordinary? Sir, Mrs. Pemberton tried to interrupt. She's just a working girl. She probably learned from internet videos. Mr. Chen turned to look at Mrs. Pemberton with eyes that were suddenly not so gentle. And what does that matter, he asked. Music is not about money or social class. Music comes from the heart. He looked back at Maya. Young lady, he said, that composition you just played. Did you write it yourself? Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. I thought so, Mr. Chen said with a small smile. It has the sound of truth in it, the sound of real experience. Some people in the crowd began to whisper again, but Mr. Chen raised his hand and they fell silent. "I have been playing piano for 60 years, he said. "I have taught students at the finest conservatories in the world. I have heard thousands of young pianists play." He paused and looked directly at Maya. "What I heard tonight was not technique learned from a book or a video. What I heard was raw musical talent of the highest level." Maya felt dizzy. This could not be real. Jonathan Chen could not be saying these things about her playing. Mrs. Pemberton's face was getting redder by the minute. "Mr. Chen, with all respect, this girl is an employee. She was hired to serve food, not to play piano." "Yes," Mr. Chen said calmly, "and that makes what I heard even more remarkable." He turned to address the whole crowd. "How many of you have been taking piano lessons since you were children?" he asked. Several hands went up. "How many of you own expensive pianos?" More hands rose. "How many of you could sit down at this instrument right now and play an original composition with the emotional depth and technical skill I just witnessed?" The hands slowly dropped. The room became very quiet. Mr. Chen looked back at Maya. "This young woman has something that cannot be bought or taught in the traditional sense. She has a natural musical gift that is extremely rare." Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes again, but this time they were different tears. These were not tears of shame. These were tears of hope and wonder. "But she's just a server," protested a woman in a blue dress. "She probably doesn't even know how to read music." Mr. Chen smiled slightly. "Some of the greatest jazz musicians in history never learned to read music," he said. "They played by ear, by feel, by instinct. That doesn't make their music less valuable." He walked closer to Maya. "May I ask how long you have been playing?" he said gently. "Since I was 5, Maya whispered. 12 years. "And where did you learn?" "My family has a music store," Maya said, her voice getting a little stronger. "We have an old piano. I taught myself mostly." "Taught yourself," Mr. Chen repeated, nodding. "And that composition? When did you write it?" "Last month," Maya said. "When my father was sick. I was scared and the music just came out." Mr. Chen nodded again. "Real music always comes from real emotion," he said. "You cannot fake that kind of connection between feeling and sound." Mrs. Pemberton looked like she wanted to argue, but she seemed afraid to challenge Mr. Chen directly. "Sir," said a man in an expensive suit, "surely you're not suggesting that untrained talent is as good as proper education?" Mr. Chen turned to look at the man. "I'm suggesting that this young woman has more natural musical ability than most students I see, who have had 15 years of expensive lessons." The room buzzed with surprised conversations. Maya could hardly believe what was happening. 20 minutes ago she had been invisible. Now one of the world's most famous pianists was defending her in front of a room full of rich people. "Of course, raw talent needs to be developed," Mr. Chen continued. "It needs guidance and education. But the talent itself is a gift that cannot be created or purchased." He looked at Maya again. "Young lady, would you honor us by playing your composition again? I would like these people to really listen this time." Maya's mouth fell open. "Play again? In front of all these people who had just been laughing at her?" Mrs. Pemberton stepped forward. "Mr. Chen, I really must object. This piano is worth $200,000, Mr. Chen finished. "Yes, I know. I have played on many instruments that cost far more, and I can tell you that this piano was made to create beautiful music. That is its purpose." He looked around the room. How tragic it would be if such an instrument was only touched by hands that could afford it, rather than hands that could bring it to life. Maya felt something changing inside her. The shame was melting away, replaced by something stronger. She looked at the piano, then at Mr. Chen's encouraging face. "I would be honored to play for you," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. As she walked back toward the piano bench, she heard Mrs. Pemberton whisper harshly to someone, "This is completely inappropriate. When this is over, that girl is fired." Maya heard the words, but they did not stop her. She sat down at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. She looked out at the crowd of faces, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. But in the front row, Jonathan Chen stood with his arms crossed and a gentle smile on his face. His eyes seemed to be saying, "Show them who you really are." Maya took a deep breath and began to play. Maya placed her hands on the keys and felt the familiar smoothness under her fingers. But this time was different. This time she was not playing in secret. This time she was playing because someone believed in her. She looked out at the crowd one more time. Most of the faces still looked doubtful or annoyed. But Jonathan Chen stood in the front, nodding encouragingly. That was enough. Maya began to play. The first notes were soft and sad, just like before, but somehow they sounded even more beautiful on the second time through. Maya was no longer afraid of the piano or the people watching her. She let herself become one with the music. As she played, something magical began to happen. The hostile whispers in the crowd slowly stopped. People who had been looking at their phones or checking their watches began to pay attention. The room grew quiet except for the sound of the piano. Maya played the opening section, which told the story of worry and fear. Her fingers danced across the keys with perfect control. Every note was exactly where it should be, expressing exactly the right emotion. She had written this piece during the 3 weeks her father spent in the hospital. He had pneumonia and was very sick. Maya spent every night sitting by his bed, afraid he might not come home. The music captured all of that fear. The dark, heavy chords that sounded like crying, the uncertain melody that wandered without direction. As Maya played these sad parts, she noticed that the crowd was changing. People were standing very still. Some had their eyes closed, listening with their whole bodies. She could see on their faces that they were feeling the emotion in the music. The composition moved into its middle section, where hope began to creep in. Maya's father had started to get better, and she had felt the first small ray of light after days of darkness. The music reflected this with lighter, higher notes that danced around the sad melody like butterflies around a flower. Maya's hands moved across the keys with increasing confidence. She was not thinking about technique or whether she was playing the right notes. She was simply telling her story through sound. A woman in the crowd put her hand over her heart. A man wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Even Mrs. Pemberton had stopped looking angry and was listening with a confused expression on her face. The music continued to build. Maya played the part where her father turned the corner and began to recover quickly. The melody soared upward, full of relief and joy. Her left hand played strong, steady chords while her right hand spun a tune that seemed to dance in the air above the piano. Jonathan Chen was smiling broadly now. He nodded his head in time with the music, and Maya could see that he understood exactly what she was trying to say. He knew that this was not just pretty sounds. This was communication at the deepest level. Maya reached the most powerful part of the piece. This was where her father had come home from the hospital, weak but alive. The whole family had cried with happiness. Maya had felt so grateful for music, for life, for love that she thought her heart might burst. She played this section with everything she had. Her whole body moved with the rhythm. Her fingers flew across the keys, creating layers of sound that seemed to fill every corner of the room. The piano responded like a living thing, singing with her voice, crying with her tears, laughing with her joy. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the servers who had come out of the kitchen to see what was happening stood frozen in the doorway. Maya's music had cast a spell over everyone in the room. She played the gentle ending where the family was together again, and life had returned to normal. But it was a new normal, touched by the knowledge of how precious everything was. The melody became soft and peaceful, like a lullaby or a prayer of thanksgiving. Maya played the final chord and let it ring out into the silence. Her hands remained on the keys as the last note faded away. She was breathing hard, not from the physical effort but from the emotional journey she had just taken. For a long moment, the room was perfectly still. Maya could hear her own heartbeat. She could hear people breathing, but no one spoke. Then Jonathan Chen began to clap. His applause started slow and steady, like a heartbeat. Then another person joined in, then another. Within seconds, the entire room had erupted in applause that seemed to shake the walls. Maya looked out at the crowd in amazement. The same people who had been laughing at her 20 minutes ago were now clapping with tears in their eyes. The woman who had worried about germs was applauding with her hands high above her head. The man who had called her playing "Not That Good" was wiping his eyes. Even Mrs. Pemberton was clapping, though she looked confused about it. Maya stood up from the piano bench and felt her legs shaking. She had never experienced anything like this in her life. She had never played for more than 1 or 2 people at a time. She had certainly never received applause like this. Jonathan Chen walked up to her with his eyes shining. "My dear," he said, "that was absolutely extraordinary. In all my years of teaching and performing, I have rarely heard such authentic musical expression. The applause continued, getting louder instead of softer. People were calling out things like bravo and beautiful. Some were whistling and cheering. Maya felt overwhelmed. She had gone from being humiliated and invisible to being the center of attention in the most positive way possible. It felt like a dream. Mr. Chen raised his hands to quiet the crowd. Slowly, the applause died down, though people continued to smile and wipe their eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Chen announced, "you have just witnessed something very rare. You have heard not just technical skill but genuine musical genius." He turned to Maya. "Young lady, that composition tells a story that touched every heart in this room. Your music spoke to something universal, the fear of losing someone we love, and the joy of having them returned to us." Maya felt tears running down her cheeks, but she did not try to hide them anymore. "This," Mr. Chen said, gesturing toward Maya, "is what music education should be about. Not just learning to play the right notes, but learning to express truth through sound." He looked out at the crowd. "You have all been privileged to hear something special tonight. I hope you will remember this moment." The crowd burst into applause again. Maya stood there in her worn uniform and scuffed shoes, surrounded by the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, the sound of people who had been moved by her music. For the first time in her life, Maya understood what it meant to be truly heard. As the applause finally began to fade, Maya wiped the tears from her cheeks and tried to understand what had just happened. The same room that had been full of hostile faces and cruel laughter was now filled with warmth and admiration. People began to approach her, wanting to shake her hand and tell her how moved they were by her performance. The woman in the blue dress who had earlier criticized her rough hands now held those same hands gently. "My dear," she said with tears in her eyes, "I have never heard anything so beautiful. Your music told a story that went straight to my heart." The man with the thick mustache who had said her playing wasn't that good stood nearby, looking embarrassed. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I spoke without really listening. That was the most moving performance I have ever witnessed." One by one, the people who had mocked her earlier came forward to congratulate her and apologize for their quick judgments. Maya was gracious to each of them, understanding that her music had opened their hearts to something they had not expected to find. Mrs. Pemberton stood off to the side, looking uncertain. She had been so sure that Maya was out of place, so convinced that someone from Maya's background could not create anything worthwhile. Now she seemed confused by her own reaction to the music. Jonathan Chen stayed close to Maya as people talked to her. She could tell he was protecting her from being overwhelmed by all the attention. "Mr. Chen," said a well-dressed woman, "where did this young woman study? Which conservatory?" Before Maya could answer, Mr. Chen spoke up. "She is entirely self-taught. Everything you heard tonight came from her own musical instincts and dedication." This caused another wave of amazed whispers through the crowd. "Self-taught?" asked a man in an expensive suit. "That's impossible. The technique, the composition skills, nothing is impossible when someone has true musical talent," Mr. Chen replied. "What Maya has cannot be taught in any school. It can only be nurtured and developed." A woman with diamonds around her neck approached Maya. "My dear, you must tell me, do you give lessons? I would pay anything for my daughter to learn to play with such emotion." Maya shook her head. "I don't teach," she said softly. "I'm still learning myself." "But surely you must be planning to study music professionally?" asked another woman. "You could get into any conservatory in the country after tonight." Maya looked down at her worn shoes. "I can't afford music school," she said simply. "I work to help my family pay bills." The crowd grew quiet at this admission. Many of these people had children in expensive private music lessons without giving the cost a second thought. The idea that such talent might go undeveloped due to money seemed to shock them. Mr. Chen stepped closer to Maya. "May I ask about your family's music store?" he said gently. "It's small," Maya said. "My father repairs instruments and my mother gives lessons to neighborhood children. We barely make enough to keep it open." "And the piano you practice on?" "It's old and needs tuning," Maya admitted. "Some of the keys stick, but I love it anyway." Mr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. He turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight we have witnessed something that should make us all think. Here is a young woman with extraordinary musical gifts. but she may never have the opportunity to develop them fully because of economic circumstances. He paused to let this sink in. We spend thousands of dollars on piano lessons for our children, many of whom have modest talent at best. Meanwhile, true genius may go unrecognized and undeveloped because it appears in unexpected places. The crowd murmured agreement. Maya could see people looking at her differently now, not as an intrusion into their world, but as someone who deserved to be part of it. An older gentleman stepped forward. "Mr. Chen, surely something can be done. There must be scholarships, grants." "There are," Mr. Chen agreed. "But they are competitive and often go to students who already have advantages. Private lessons, expensive instruments, connections in the music world." He looked at Maya with kind eyes. "However, after what I heard tonight, I would be honored to help in any way I can." Maya's heart jumped. "What do you mean?" Mr. Chen smiled. "I mean that talent like yours should not be wasted. If you are willing, I would like to offer you private lessons." The crowd gasped. Everyone knew that Jonathan Chen rarely took private students anymore. His waiting list was years long and his fees were enormous. "I couldn't afford," Maya began. "There would be no charge," Mr. Chen said firmly. "Consider it my contribution to the future of music." Maya felt like the room was spinning. Free lessons with Jonathan Chen? It was beyond her wildest dreams. "But that's not all," Mr. Chen continued. He turned to the crowd. "Tonight you have all been touched by Maya's music. I challenge each of you to think about how you can support young musicians who have talent but lack opportunity." A murmur went through the crowd as people began talking among themselves. The woman with the diamond spoke up. "I would like to donate money to help tune the piano in her family's store. And I would like to contribute to buying music books and sheet music," added another woman. "What about a fundraiser?" suggested a man. "We could organize a concert to raise money for music education in underserved communities." Ideas began flowing from all directions. People who had arrived tonight expecting a typical charity event were now energized by the possibility of making a real difference in Maya's life and the lives of other young musicians like her. Mrs. Pemberton finally approached Maya. Her earlier anger had been replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "I owe you a sincere apology," she said quietly. "I judged you based on your appearance and your job, not on your abilities. That was wrong of me." Maya looked at the older woman with compassion. "It's okay," she said. "I understand why you were upset. I should have asked permission before touching the piano." "No," Mrs. Pemberton said firmly. "You should never have to ask permission to make music. That piano has been sitting here for months without being played. Tonight you brought it to life." She paused, then added, "I want you to know that you will always be welcome to play here, anytime you want." Maya felt overwhelmed by the kindness that was flowing toward her from every direction. An hour ago she had been invisible. Now she felt seen and valued in a way she had never experienced. Mr. Chen touched her arm gently. "There is one more thing," he said with a mysterious smile. "I have a feeling that tonight is just the beginning for you." Maya looked at him with curiosity, but before she could ask what he meant, a young man with a camera approached them. "Excuse me?" he said to Maya. "I'm a reporter for the local arts magazine. Would you mind if I wrote a story about what happened here tonight? I think people would love to hear about your music." Maya looked at Mr. Chen, who nodded encouragingly. "I suppose that would be okay," she said. As the reporter began asking questions, Maya realized that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The scared, invisible girl who had served drinks a few hours ago was gone forever. In her place stood a young woman who had found her voice and her courage, surrounded by people who believed in her talent and wanted to help her succeed. The real story was just beginning. 3 months later, Maya stood in the same Steinway gallery, but everything was different now. She was no longer wearing a server's uniform. Instead, she wore a simple but elegant black dress that had been a gift from Mrs. Pemberton. Her hair was styled nicely, and she held herself with new confidence. The gallery was packed with people who had come specifically to hear her play. The reporter's story about the server who became a star had been picked up by newspapers and websites around the world. Videos of her performance had been watched by millions of people online. But Maya had not let the attention go to her head. She had continued working at the diner to help her family, and she had started taking lessons with Jonathan Chen twice a week. The improvement in her playing had been remarkable, even to her. "Are you ready?" Mr. Chen asked, appearing at her side. He had become not just her teacher but her mentor and friend. "I think so," Maya said, looking out at the crowd. There were faces she recognized from that first night, but also many new ones. Music lovers, students, teachers, and journalists had all come to hear the girl who had surprised everyone. Maya's family sat in the front row. Her father, Carlos, was healthy again and beaming with pride. Her mother, Elena, was wiping away happy tears. They had closed the music store early so they could all be here together. The past 3 months had brought many changes to the Rodriguez family. Donations from that first evening had allowed them to fix up their store and buy a newer, better piano for Maya to practice on. Her father's business was growing because word had spread about the family that loved music so much. Maya had been offered opportunities she never could have imagined. Record companies wanted to sign her. Music schools offered full scholarships. Concert halls invited her to perform. But Maya had made careful choices. She was still only 17 and she wanted to finish high school. She had accepted Mr. Chen's offer to study with him, and she had agreed to apply to music college for the following year. But she had turned down most of the commercial offers, wanting to focus on growing as a musician rather than becoming famous. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Chen announced to the crowd, 3 months ago, this young woman touched our hearts with her music. Tonight she returns to share how much she has grown as an artist. The crowd applauded warmly. Maya walked to the same piano where everything had begun. It looked exactly the same, but she felt completely different sitting at the bench. She had prepared 3 pieces for tonight. The first was her original composition about her father's illness, which she had refined and improved with Mr. Chen's help. The second was a classical piece by Chopin that showcased her technical growth. The third was a new composition she had written about hope and dreams coming true. Maya began with her original piece. As the familiar melody filled the room, she remembered that night 3 months ago when she had played it for the first time in public. She had been so scared, so ashamed, so sure she did not belong. But the music had been true then, and it was true now. The emotions were the same: love for family, fear of loss, gratitude for healing. But now she could express those emotions with even greater skill and depth. As she played, Maya saw tears in the audience just like before. Music was a universal language, and her story of family love touched hearts regardless of whether people were rich or poor, young or old. She moved into the Chopin piece, her fingers dancing across the keys with precision and grace that would have made the master himself proud. The months of study with Mr. Chen had given her new techniques, but more importantly, they had taught her how to use those techniques to serve the music rather than show off. For her final piece, Maya played her new composition. This one was brighter and more hopeful than her first. It told the story of a dream that seemed impossible but somehow came true. It spoke of doors opening when you least expected it, of people believing in you when you could not believe in yourself. As she played this piece, Maya thought about all the people who had changed her life that night. Mrs. Pemberton, who had learned not to judge people by their appearance. The guests who had discovered that talent could appear anywhere. Mr. Chen, who had seen her potential when she could not see it herself. Maya played the final notes and stood to face the audience. The applause was thunderous, but what meant the most to her were the faces in the front row, her family, clapping with joy and pride. Mr. Chen joined her at the piano. "Maya has shown us something important," he said to the crowd. "Talent is not limited by circumstances. Dreams are not reserved for the privileged. Music belongs to anyone who feels it in their heart." He turned to Maya with a smile. "And I have some good news to share. Maya has been accepted to the Manhattan School of Music with a full scholarship. She will begin her formal music education this fall." The crowd erupted in cheers. Maya felt her mother's arms around her as her family rushed onto the stage. Later that evening, after the crowd had gone home and the gallery was quiet, Maya sat alone at the piano. She played softly, just for herself, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been invisible. Tonight, she had been celebrated. But the most important thing had not changed: the music itself. Whether she played, in secret or in front of hundreds of people, The music came from the same place in her heart. Maya thought about other young people like her, working invisible jobs while carrying invisible dreams. She thought about the girl who might be washing dishes in a restaurant right now, humming a melody she wrote. She thought about the boy who might be stocking shelves while composing symphonies in his head. Maya had started a scholarship fund with some of the money from her recordings and performances. It would help young musicians who had talent but no resources. She wanted to make sure that other stories like hers could have happy endings too. As she played, Maya remembered something Mr. Chen had told her during one of their lessons. Music is not about being heard by the world. It is about being true to the song in your heart. Maya had been heard by the world now, but she had been true to her song from the very beginning. That was what had made all the difference. She played one final chord and listened as it faded into silence. In that silence, she could hear all the music that was yet to come, the concerts, the recordings, the students she would someday teach. But most of all, she could hear the quiet voice in her heart that had always known she was meant to make music, even when the world could not see it. Maya Rodriguez closed the piano lid gently and walked toward her future, knowing that the most beautiful songs often begin in the most unexpected places. And sometimes, if you are brave enough to play them, those songs can change everything.